All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here. We'll be doing a fun little episode here at the end of February, looking at college football's Heisman sleepers, 5 selections from each of us as we get ready to enter spring ball. We'll start with mine and then Nick's right after this. The rules are you must be plus 3,000 or worse. I think it's a pretty good starting point. We're using DraftKings Sportsbook odds here. We can only have one identical selection, and at the end, we'll have 2 Superdog picks of 20,000 or worse. Unlikely, but again, we're having a little bit of fun here, guys. We think we could potentially get some solid odds on when it comes to the betting market. I'll start here with a couple of quarterbacks. John Mateer put on a clinic last year for Washington State. This guy's really fun to watch. He's a very savvy runner, has really good arm strength. Now he translates that talent over to the SEC after 44 touchdowns and nearly 4,000 yards playing for Wazoo, of course, against weaker competition. And, of course, Oklahoma, they don't exactly have the greatest offense in terms of, a supporting cast at this moment in time. The offensive line's really questionable. The run game was abysmal last year. Wide receivers were all injured, and then they all transferred out. So it's going to be hard for Mateer to jump into consideration. But if Oklahoma can be in that 9-10 win category and he can really uplift this offense, it's going to be because he puts up great numbers and showcases that dual threat prowess. So I think John Mateer is a great sleeper here. This guy was so fun to watch at Washington State last year. And of course, if he played at a better school, these numbers would have been good enough to land him on the Heisman podium, I think. So Mateer, to kick things off, is a great start. And then I'll ask you, Nick, Jackson Arnold going to Auburn. He was in that terrible situation at Oklahoma. I think he's in a really good one here with Hugh Freeze, an offense that's really, boosted their talent. At wide receiver, guys like Cam Coleman, Perry Thompson. I mean, they have added Eric Singleton as well. Supporting cast for an Auburn offense that really needs to improve if they want to compete this year. I think Arnold, with what's around him, can also put up some sizable numbers, and I expect them to win enough football games to be in consideration for the SEC as well. And then Jade Maeva, what sense does this make? Last year, he was plus 5,000, as was Miller Moss, the guy he was competing with for the quarterback position. Now it seems like he'll likely be the full-time starter for SC entering 2025 after, an up-and-down end of the year, but overall he had some very respectable games over the last 4, including a bowl win over Texas A&M and, almost 400 yards on Notre Dame. Now he's plus 7,000. Those odds are just too disrespectful for a Lincoln Riley quarterback, Nick. What do you make of those 3 quarterbacks there?
Yeah, 3 really solid quarterbacks to start us off here. Mateer was really good at Wazoo. I think that, the 30 passing touchdowns, 3,000 yards passing, really good numbers. Plus, you add in the 15 rushing touchdowns. That's a big difference maker, right? And now you're plugging him into an offense I think you could really develop and build around. If Oklahoma's defense is strong this year, if they're competitive, like we potentially think they could be, the jury's still out on that. Obviously, a long offseason to really look into that. But if Oklahoma's competitive and winning a lot of football games late into November, this guy will certainly be getting shouts for the Heisman. I think he's going to be a very accurate passer. Going to put up a ton of yards. He was really good at Wazoo last year, 65% comp rate, 3,100 yards passing. Got to limit the turnovers, but I think that's something he can do. This is a high upside quarterback that really plugs into a very positive situation in Norman that could really succeed early on. Auburn, they've been needing a quarterback, since the Hugh Freeze era started. And even before that, they've really struggled to find a quarterback. They bring in Jackson Arnold, who was a really highly rated recruit out of high school. Did not have the best time at Oklahoma. Did not really work out for him at all, but still had a decent enough season last year with 1,400 yards passing, 12 touchdowns, and 3 picks. Despite all the turmoil, including benching, not being involved in the offense, questionable wide receiving production, just a whole lot of issues for him. Now he gets a whole fresh start. Hugh Freeze finally gets his quarterback. He listed off all the talent that Auburn has at wide receiver. There's no reason why this kid shouldn't be in contention early on. If this Auburn team is playing meaningful football similar to Oklahoma, I can certainly see him being involved in the Heisman race. This Auburn team is definitely looking scary on paper. When you look at Maeva, I think he's a really good position here. I think those odds are phenomenal at where you can get him at, plus 7,000. Lincoln Riley has a track record. 3 Heisman quarterbacks, Baker, Kyler, and Caleb, all had phenomenal seasons under him. He's a very good coach at developing quarterbacks here. I think Maeva showed last year with the 1,200 yards passing, 11 touchdowns in limited appearances, that he could really step up to the plate. Had a good game in the bowl game, in my opinion. The 3 interceptions obviously was a bit bad in the bowl game, but still 300 yards passing, 4 touchdowns. I think that was a solid showing from him in a comeback win there. Also looked good against Nebraska early in the year. That is, did not look great against Rutgers, but looked good against Nebraska. A younger player at 6'4", 220. I love the frame as well. And in that offense that's high flying and put up a lot of yards, a lot of points, this guy could certainly blitz himself to the podium if USC have a really good season or even remotely in contention in the Big Ten.
USC offense only averaged like 4 touchdowns a game last year. They still had 500 plus yards on Penn State and Notre Dame. He got the start in the latter there. So it's an offense that can still manufacture a lot of muscle, a lot of production. I expect them to be more consistent this year, and his dual threat abilities as well should give them a boost with an offensive line that really struggled last year. Jeremiah Love, the running back from Notre Dame, of course, he's going to be splitting the backfield with Jadarian Price, but he's the lead guy. Only 163 attempts, but he had almost 7 yards per carry, 17 touchdowns, 1,125 yards. Of course, late in the year, he's really banged up as well. Those numbers do come across 16 games. Only had 4 attempts for 3 yards against Ohio State, 6 for 19 against Georgia. So late in the year, he was just incredibly banged up. Had a great touchdown, though, against Penn State, showcasing his muscle at the goal line. But before that, he was as effective as they come throughout the country, numerous 100-yard games. Do you think he'll get the touches, though, Nick? They're certainly going to make him worthy of being able to jump into Heisman consideration. I think with Leonard now departing, that's one aspect of their offense they're going to be missing. So I certainly think he'll have more volume. More volume will come with more production. I think the top back for the Irish could certainly sneak his way into a podium finish.
Yeah, this Notre Dame offense is going to run the ball a whole lot this year, just like they did last year. There's questions about the quarterback room at Notre Dame. I think they're going to rely on the run, a lot of ground and pound in this offense. I totally forgot how young Jeremiah Love is. This is a guy that's got still a lot of good games left in him. Yes, he was banged up at the tail end of last year in the playoffs, and obviously his production dropped, but did have that nice touchdown against Penn State. Yes, splitting touches as well, but this is a guy that had over 1,100 yards rushing, 17 touchdowns, and 7 yards per carry. He'll get a lot of touches here. I trust that the offense is going to run the ball a ton, so I think he'll get a bunch of opportunities to do so. He can break a big run. He's got nice speed, 6 foot, 200 pounds. He can really break free and put up a nice burst on the board. I could see him being involved in the offense early on, running up the score in a lot of competition against weaker competition, and then having a good season as the rest of the year goes on. This is definitely a sneaky nice pick here towards the bottom of the boards. When you look at it, right around 6,000 plus 6,000, not terrible odds at all for a back that could really be dominant on the ground this year.
My biggest sleeper at plus 15,000, Desmond Williams for Washington. He got the start against Oregon last week of the regular season. He got sacked a bunch. He took a lot of those sacks, but he was 17 of 20, 201 yards and a touchdown in that game. And then against Louisville in the bowl, he put on a clinic. I mean, I was losing my mind watching what he was doing. They're playing from behind in that one. Ended up leading them to a comeback. Almost won the game. They failed on that 2-point conversion, just barely lost by a point. We had 81% comp rate, 374 passing, 4 touchdowns. Also had a rushing score as well. This kid put on a clinic. This is an absurd talent, Nick. I don't think it's just a one-off in the bowl game. I think this is a guy that's really going to be dangerous moving forward. Demond Williams, I think I called him Desmond. Apologies there. Demond, though, is going to be a phenomenal talent, I think, moving forward. If you look at the schedule, to start the year, Colorado State, UC Davis, Washington State, and then they host Ohio State. Right there in those 3 games, he could run up the production, potentially knock off Ohio State, and his odds would skyrocket if that ends up happening, Nick. I don't think it's, the craziest of possibilities. Not making any predictions by any means, but something like that could happen, especially with the Buckeyes coming to Seattle, a team that's going to be trying to find their footing after a national championship with a lot of departures. That is certainly something that's on the table, and I think it will be a trap game for the Buckeyes. And again, he's going to put up crazy numbers in the weeks preceding.
During bowl season with the transfer portal, we get a lot of guys that have coming out parties, and they have great showings in the bowl games, and sometimes that carries over the next season, sometimes it don't. They boom or bust in the season after. I think Williams will boom after his strong showing in the bowl game. You read off the stats there, 375. 80% comp rate and 4 touchdowns in that game. Really good showing in that bowl game despite being a loss. Overall in the season had about 1,000 yards passing, 8 touchdowns and 1 pick in limited appearances. This is a guy, this is an offense that's high upside under Jed Fish. He's going to, kind of develop this offense and really be high flying, put up a lot of points on the board. They're going to throw the ball a ton. They're going to want to pass the ball as much as possible. I like what the schedule looks like as well. I think it's a very favorable schedule early on for this team. They have a lot of opportunities to show that he can be a really talented quarterback. I think he looks good in this system. He's got some reps already, got some work with some of the wide receivers. I like the play calling they have out there in Seattle. I think this is a very interesting pick here. A lower pick on on the list, certainly, but a guy that, worth taking a flyer on. This is a guy that could really burst out of nowhere. We've seen strong quarterbacks come out of Washington in the past and be in the Heisman conversation, and this kid looks to be the next real big deal. I think he's going to be a really strong player and a really nice candidate for a very long shot pick.
Now, Nick, we'll move to your Heisman sleepers. You start with Ryan Williams from Alabama. Of course, he burst onto the scene very quickly over the first half of the year. Incredible play after incredible play. A phenomenal deep shot against Vanderbilt after that massive game winner against Georgia. had 2 scores on 2 reps for 139 in his season debut against WKU. Over the last 6 games, he had under 60 yards in all of them. Didn't have 5 receptions in any of those games either. That's not much about him. I think it's more so the offense. The quarterback was struggling. The O-line was struggling. They couldn't take too many deep shots. Offensive coordinator didn't always make it a focal point to get him involved. So it's not all Ryan Williams. And even with all those struggles, he still ended the year of 865 and 8 scores. What do you think you're going to have to get out of a receiver to win the Heisman? Well, his former Alabama co-part Devontae Smith, 1,856 yards, 23 touchdowns. That was his season final totals. Of course, they were a lot lesser than that when he actually ended up winning the award. Travis Hunter just won as well. Played defensive back, of course, that helped him out. So he's going to have more production than what Hunter had. Those are probably going to be your baseline numbers to win that. Williams can be that type of X factor, Nick. I think if Alabama can fix those key issues that they had last season, his production could certainly double and then some, especially with the schedule they play. If he puts up those kind of numbers, he'll certainly be in the fold. What's your confidence in Williams being at the top of the charts come December?
Well, I was disappointed in his production in the second half of last season after that blitz start, especially the game against Georgia. I still am very confident in this young man being an absolute star at Alabama. They've developed a lot of strong wide receivers in the past that have gone on to be, phenomenal players. You saw Devontae Smith win the Heisman Trophy at Alabama. I think this could certainly happen. Ryan Williams is going to be, whatever quarterback takes the helm, I believe it's going to be Ty Simpson's #1 target. I think him and Simpson could have a lot of chemistry. I think Ty Simpson's going to have a good season. I trust the new play calling under Ryan Grubb, who's come over after an unsuccessful stint, 1-year stint that is, in Seattle with the NFL Seahawks. I think Grubb will be able to draw up a lot of good things. We saw a lot of success out of the wide receivers during his last year at Washington when DeBoer was the head coach still, and they went to the national championship game. I think they'll use similar type of sets to get Ryan Williams involved. He's got speed to burn, really good hands, great hand-eye coordination, just a phenomenal player. You've seen it all year. The stats you read off there were really impressive for a true freshman. This kid's only going to get better as time goes on. I think that was just the appetizer. The main course is coming with Ryan Williams. I'm expecting him to have a really big season here. As long as the targets are there and if he gets a lot of them, I think he can easily get to 100 grabs this year and just be a big target for this team. I think he's an incredibly talented player that has a lot to prove, and I think he can continue to do that this season. Such an incredibly raw and talented player. Another season working in practice with the quarterbacks. This really could work out well. I think Ryan Williams is good value at plus 4,000 right now.
And then next 4 selections for Nick are all quarterbacks for teams that would like to be able to, burst onto the CFP ranks this year. Sam Leavitt in Arizona State will be looking for a repeat appearance. This is a guy that had, 3,300 yards, nearly 30 touchdowns. Of course, they're going to have to replace a lot of production that Cam Scadaboo's leaving from behind. So I think that's certainly going to lead to, an uptick in numbers for him. They're going to need more than just Jordan Tyson, a receiver, to step up, though, if that's going to happen. Marcel Reed, this is a guy that started a couple games early on in the season, looked pretty good. Then he started like the back 5, and he looked solid. The game against Texas was pretty tough. I know it's the best defense in the country. Game against South Carolina wasn't as ideal either. But for a dual-threat player that's very young and is still going to progress and most certainly get better, I think this is certainly an intriguing option. Had 2,400 yards, over 20 touchdowns last year. Over the course of a full season, he could certainly double those numbers in all regards. And I think Miller Moss at Louisville is a perfect fit for Brom's offense. This is still a very good player. Of course, the tenure, how it ended at USC over the last few games wasn't ideal, but I think this is still a very good quarterback. Love the tape on him. And again, I think this is a great fit for an offense that has a lot of skill around him. So I could certainly see Louisville, springing onto the scene in the ACC, contending for a crown, and then he being a big focal point of that. And then Caden Salter at Colorado, Nick, interesting one here. And I kind of like this because Salter wasn't as great at Liberty this past year. The talent around him was pretty abysmal, though. It's going to be much better at Colorado. If them having struggles on the O-line, they're going to look to have a more, more play calling, I think, centered around the quarterback run, something he's certainly capable of. And that could certainly lead to a giant uptick in production. And, of course, the media is probably going to give you votes just because you play at Colorado as well. So I think Salter's not the worst option in the world. What is your opinion on these 4 quarterbacks?
Yeah, I'll start with Keaton Salter. Which Keaton Salter are you going to get? Are you going to get the 2023 version that, 6% comp rate, 2,800 yards passing, 32 touchdowns, in addition to 12 rushing touchdowns? Or are you going to get the 2024 version that was just way scaled back and not up to par? 1,800 yards passing in that season, 15 touchdowns, and 7 rushing touchdowns this past season for Liberty. I think he has a big opportunity. Obviously huge shoes to fill at Colorado. This offense still has a lot of talented weapons around him, and he is really dynamic on the ground. Colorado's not been able to run the ball really, and having a quarterback that can run the ball, I think, will really be a nice X factor in Deion's offense. I think his offense can really develop around Salter, who's shown in the past, like I said, in 2023, that he could be a phenomenal quarterback and phenomenal on the ground, averaged 6.7 yards per carry and 1,000 yards in 2023. Which version you're going to get? I'm hedging that he's going to get the 2023 version and really reignite his career after stalling out a little bit at Liberty, maybe stayed a little bit too long originally, but lands at Colorado. I think he's going to have a really good season and bounce back and be strong. There, Miller Moss, another guy that I think will bounce back and be strong. I still have a lot of faith in this kid. This kid I think is very accurate, very solid in the pocket, 65% comp rate in this past season, 2,500 yards passing, 18 touchdowns and 9 picks before he got benched. Wasn't cutting it at USC, but still really good numbers. Brom's phenomenal coach. The talent in Kentucky at Louisville is also pretty solid as well, so I think there's some good receivers he can work with. I like what Moss's frame is. I think his arm accuracy is solid. The footwork's good as well. He's had a really solid appearances at times, but just struggled as the full polish. I think working with Brom could certainly help and kind of develop that a little bit. Not that Lincoln Riley couldn't develop him, but I think this is something that could work out well. I look at Leavitt as a team in Arizona State. I think they're still in contention in the Big 12. Yes, losing Scadaboo is a big problem, but now you get Leavitt, who's just going to be able to run more. 443 yards on the ground, 5 touchdowns for him. Was really accurate as well. 61% comp rate, 2,800 yards passing, 24 touchdowns. He's developing. I think he's a really good quarterback, really solid. I do worry about the supporting cast. That's why I think this one's definitely a gamble down here, but it's one you might want to take a look at. Then Marcel Reed. A&M should be better this year. A&M should be in contention and make a playoff spot potentially. I think Reed is a really solid dual threat quarterback that adds that extra level. 1,800 yards passing, 15 touchdowns as well as 7 on the ground. I think he's really solid. Nice speed, nice burst. At 6'2", 180. Huge, really solid player in that regard. Good accuracy, good arm strength, developing better as a passer, looked good in the bowl game to end off the season, even in a game that they lost. So I think there's a lot of faith in Marcel Reed heading to this season in Aggieland.
Now we move to our Heisman Superdog sleepers. Are these likely to hit? Probably not, but these have hit before. Joe Burrow was plus 20,000 when he opened in 2019. Guys like Devontae Smith were plus 10,000 when he won it in 20. And it looks like there's no odds on Johnny Manziel or Jameis Winston in back-to-back years, and Cam Newton wasn't on any lists either. So these guys can certainly come in, Nick. It's not the longest possibility in the world. Even Travis Hunter this past year was plus 5,000. Looking at mine, C.J. Donaldson. This is a guy who's coming off a bit of a poor season for West Virginia, but at Ohio State, looks like he's going to be the lead back. And this is a guy that can give you 20 touchdowns, 1,500 yards. They're going to be in consideration for a natty as well. So I certainly think if the cards roll his way in terms of play calling, getting down into the red zone, and he can rip off some big performances in big games, he can easily creep into a Heisman conversation. So I think it's worth a look. And Josh Hoover at TCU, you saw what Max Duggan did a couple years ago. I don't know what his odds were, but I'm sure they weren't very great. TCU, they can go on a run. It's going to be led by their quarterback in this Sonny Dykes offense. I think Hoover's a phenomenal player. Plus 30,000, I think, is a little bit too disrespectful. Certainly losing a lot of weapons, but he's going to put on a lot of production this year. And if they're winning games, he'll be in consideration, I think, certainly. Nick, you went with Caden Durham and Nick Singleton, 2 running backs at plus 20,000. LSU, they got a lot of playmakers. Of course, the Heisman favorite, Garrett Nussmeier at quarterback. It's going to take a lot of production and offense like that from Durham. I think he's capable of it. As a runner, he's really good. As a pass catcher, he's valuable. He can certainly, bring that dual-level type production to the table and win it. And then Nicholas Singleton, he's going to be sharing a backfield with Katron Allen, but maybe the cards roll in his favor. Maybe, Allen's a little bit banged up throughout the year. Maybe he has bigger performances in bigger games. I could certainly see one of these Penn State running backs also maybe showing up at the end of the year. It's unlikely, but these are all worth some consideration. They're not the only ones, of course, but these are our 4 favorites.
Yeah, these are our 4 favorites. I'll start with the quarterback Hoover, then I'll go to the 3 backs here. I like this pick as a long shot, right? Almost 4,000 yards passing for him last year, just barely fell short of 4,000 yards, 27 touchdowns to 11 picks. He was really solid last year. Obviously got to be a little bit cleaner with the interceptions, but he was really good, improvised a lot, got some stuff done in the bowl game as well, had a solid day that day, 250 yards passing, 4 touchdowns to 1 pick in that game and a win. So I think Hoover's a guy you want to look at as a definite long shot. This is a Sonny Dykes offense that can really churn out and put some production together. Donaldson, a really interesting ad for Ohio State. A guy I liked at West Virginia. Definitely didn't have the best season last year, but a guy that I was a big fan of at West Virginia. I thought he was really productive. I thought he was going to potentially stay and and see what he could do under Rich Rodriguez offense, but he ends up transferring to Ohio State, kind of under the radar move by the Buckeyes there. Had 11 touchdowns in back-to-back seasons, about 700 yards yards in the last 2 seasons as well. A really reliable back, going to get a ton of touches in that system, a lot of red zone touches for the Buckeyes, could certainly play himself into contention. Caden Durham, I love this back. This is a kid that's really developing, in my opinion. 750 yards and 6 scores for him. He's going to be the lead back this year for LSU. Sure, Garrett Nussmeier, and they're going to throw the ball a ton, but if they have to rely on running the ball, if something goes wrong, if they have to change up the playbook a little bit, change up the scheme, he'll get a ton of touches. He's the number one back. I think Nussmeier is a good shout if you want a realistic shout, but overall, I think Durham's worth taking a stab. Maybe, crazy things have happened before. And then Nicholas Singleton, I'm going to go on a hunch. I think Singleton will have more touches this year than Allen. I think he'll be the one back, 1A and 1B back kind of setup. I think Singleton will just have the better season and get more touches. 1,000 yards last year, 12 touchdowns on 6.4 yards per touch for him. I think he's a really talented back. I like the speed, like the footwork, and the size. And like I said, I have a weird hunch that he's going to be the number one back, or the number 1A back, however you want to say it, in Happy Valley this year. That's a team that got close to a national title. They lost in the semifinals. They want to get back to the national championship contention. They want to get back to the semifinals, want to get to the national championship game. And I think they're going to have to run the ball a lot this year if they want to do so. I don't know if I trust Drew Allure in that offense. I think you could run the ball a lot and be successful with 2 top backs. I like Singleton a little bit more. I think Singleton's going to have a better season and a better chance to win the Heisman potentially.
That's going to be it for today's episode. Our Heisman sleepers in the books. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.